Here are our intake manifolds. I got this swirl motor disconnected from the intake manifolds. So as you can see, our intake manifolds are completely dirty. We're gonna clean these up. I'm gonna clean these intake manifolds off camera. Once I get both of them cleaned, I'll bring you guys back up so we can replace the oil cooler. After we get the oil cooler replaced, we're gonna reinstall the intake manifolds. I'm gonna get these cleaned up and then I'll bring you guys back up. I cleaned the intake manifold mating surface off camera. As you can see, this surface over here is cleaned. I cleaned both surfaces and I also cleaned around the oil cooler. So now we're gonna remove and replace the oil cooler. So I'm gonna put you over here so we can get this oil cooler replaced. After we replace the oil cooler, we're gonna start putting everything back together. I also cleaned the intake manifolds. Actually, let me show you the intake manifolds first before we remove this oil cooler. So here are our intake manifolds. As you can see, I cleaned them off camera. They are all nice and cleaned. Okay, so I cleaned both of them, even this one. So we're gonna replace all these gaskets here. Okay, so after we replace the oil cooler, I'm going to install this swirl motor on the intake manifolds, and after that we're gonna install them. Okay, now let's go back under the hood and replace the oil cooler. So now I'm gonna remove the oil cooler bolt. You need a T30 torque socket to remove the oil cooler bolt. So I got all the oil cooler bolts undone. So now I'm gonna remove them. And after that, we're gonna lift the oil cooler up. So here comes the oil cooler bolt. So now we're gonna remove the oil cooler. We're just gonna gently pry it up. Oh, there's one bolt back here that we forgot. So here comes the oil cooler, right here. So we're gonna get this oil cooler out of the way. So now we're gonna clean this up. So here are the old oil cooler gaskets, and these gaskets are worn out. So we're gonna get these gaskets out of the way. We're gonna dry up this coolant, and after we get all this coolant dried up, and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can install our new oil cooler. I got the oil cooler surface cleaned up, so now we're gonna install our new oil cooler. So here is our brand new oil cooler. Here is the Mercedes part number. So I'm going to get it out of the box. Okay, so this is what we're gonna install. Now I also got new gaskets for it, and here are our new gaskets. So these gaskets are gonna go over here. So the gaskets are sitting. I'm just pushing them down even more to make sure they're sitting well. Okay, so as you can see, our gaskets are not falling. So now we can install our new oil cooler. So just like that. So I'm getting all these oil cooler bolts started, and after that we're gonna torque them down. I'm crisscrossing them. So now we're gonna torque the oil cooler bolts. The oil cooler bolts are torqued down to 12 Newton meters. I'm gonna use an inch-pound torque wrench. So I converted 12 Newton meters into inch-pound. So 12 Newton meters equals 106 inch-pounds. So we're gonna torque all these bolts. So the torque wrench just clicked. I hope you can hear it. So this is torqued. So I'm gonna crisscross these bolts. Torque wrench clicked, so that's good. That's good. All right, guys, so I got all the oil cooler bolts torqued down to 12 Newton meters. So now we're gonna install our intake manifolds. All right, so here is the fun part. Here are our intake manifolds. I did get new gaskets on them, so I put new gaskets on both sides. So now we're gonna install our intake manifolds. So everything is lined up. So now I'm putting the bolts back on. I'm putting the long bolts on first. And then we're gonna put the rest of them back in place. All right, so everything is lined up. At this point, I'm gonna start putting all the bolts back on, and then we're gonna torque them down. We have installed the intake manifolds. We got all the bolts started. So now we're gonna torque the intake manifolds bolt. The torque spec for the intake manifold bolt is 16 Newton meters. I converted 16 Newton meters into inch pounds. 16 Newton meters equals 141 inch pounds. So now we're gonna torque these intake bolts to 141 inch pounds. So right there, the torque wrench just clicked. Right there. All right, so we got all the bolts for the intake manifold torqued down to 16 Newton meters. So at this point, everything I'm gonna do is the reverse process of the removal process. We're gonna start putting everything back together. I'm gonna lower the wiring harness we're gonna put the fuel rail back on, and then we're gonna put the turbo and so on and so forth. Okay, so now let's start putting everything back together. So now I'm gonna lower the wiring harness. I'm gonna connect the glow plug wires. Okay, now I'm gonna install the turbo pedestal. I got the turbo pedestal bolt tightened.